I don't think I'll ever get tired of talking about Super Mario Galaxy, and simply because I feel it still has so much left to teach us. As I'm sure you're aware of by now, the game had its early roots in a tech demo for the GameCube labeled Super Mario 128, which featured a large number of Marios constantly falling off a bizarre morphing floating disc world, which eventually becomes a pizza, and then the GameCube plays the pizza? Basically, it was a small demo mostly intended to show off new system features like real-time shadows, improved lighting, less pixelated textures, and the GameCube's ability to process and display a whole 128 Marios on the screen. As part of developing the code for this incredible work of art, the programmers had to tackle some unique challenges related to simulating this morphing pizza thing, including solving the problems of how objects realistically bounced around and off it. This small piece of development insight would later go on to influence the tech demo's director, Yoshiaki Koizumi. Koizumi had also directed Super Mario Sunshine, and after wrapping up that game's development, the team found that players not used to navigating 3D worlds encountered a lot of difficulty managing the camera, especially when they needed to turn around after running into a wall. Now, Nintendo has always been about ease of play, and so Koizumi realized that a perfectly round level wouldn't have any walls, and that players would never have to think about how to turn around. Instead, they could just keep running in the same direction forever, and the camera would seamlessly follow behind. At the time, though, it seemed like a very large technical challenge, and the idea was simply stashed away. After several restructurings of Nintendo's internal development teams, Koizumi suddenly found himself in the position of leading the brand new Tokyo office, consisting of a combination of staff who had worked on the older 3D Mario titles, alongside recent transplants from other game development companies. After finishing their first game, Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, the team was then thrust in the position of helping to develop the next Mario title, and Koizumi realized that this new set of fresh faces might just be the team to pull off the perfectly spherical worlds. The team then studied the code for the Super Mario 128 demo for inspiration, and then spent a few months building a small prototype of Mario running around a single planet, which would eventually morph into the full game. A game unlike anything Nintendo had ever made. And as someone who looks deep into a lot of the code behind these games, I can say that pretty definitively, Super Mario Galaxy clearly stands out in how it was constructed, with very little of the typical approaches I see in some of their other titles. And there's no clearer example of that than the physics system that quite literally holds the game together. Despite being so innovative for the time, I think you'll be surprised at just how deceptively simple the actual details are once we dig into them. And believe it or not, I think learning about this might just change the way you see Super Mario Galaxy forever. So, ready to dive in? We're going to be taking a look at the physics behind spherical planets in Super Mario Galaxy. Now, before we start looking at Super Mario Galaxy in detail, we should first take a step back and look at how basic physics in older Mario games usually works. In the original Super Mario Bros., Mario was tracked on the screen using just two numbers, Mario's X and Y position. Changing X will move Mario left and right, and changing Y will move Mario up and down. To help coordinate movement, two extra numbers were used to keep track of Mario's X and Y speed. Every frame, the game's code checks the location under Mario's feet, and if there's nothing there, well, Mario needs to fall, so the game will set Mario's Y speed so that he goes down. But if instead there's some ground or, say, a block in the way, well, Mario needs to stop, so the game will snap Mario's Y position to the floor, and then reset the Y speed back to 0. Now, I'm obviously simplifying quite a bit here, since you've probably read before that the developers put quite a bit of effort into fine-tuning the precise algorithms of Mario's movement just to make the game feel smooth. But the core of it, the code that tracks Mario's physics, comes down to just a handful of numbers, and some fairly basic collision checks. As time went on, each new game in the series had changes and improvements to try and keep it feeling fresh, but the core principles remained the same, even while entering the third dimension. In Super Mario 64, Mario's position and speed would both gain an additional number for Z, which tracks forward and backward, but still, deep within the game's code is this assumption that Mario jumping always means Mario jumps up, and Mario falling always means Mario falls down. So the code that manages jumping and falling really only needs to touch Mario's Y speed. Now, some nitpicky viewers might remember the Raphael the Raven fight from Yoshi's Island, but if you pay attention closely, you'll see that Mario never actually changes directions. Instead, the background level scrolls around him, which is quite a sneaky trick. For the spherical planets in Super Mario Galaxy, though, they needed to actually solve this properly. If Mario stands here on a spherical planet, jumping will now move him to the left, and that needs to change Mario's X speed instead of the Y speed. Stand here instead, and it will affect both the X and Y speeds. Put simply, the game needs to be able to have Mario fall down not just with a single speed, but with a full 3 dimensions of it. If this sounds a little bit complicated, well, let's break it down just a bit more. The first thing we need to do is pick the specific direction that Mario will fall, a process that I'll call finding the falling direction. The second thing we need to do then is fall in that direction. Both of these parts might sound pretty obvious and basic, but both parts are very different in the game's code, and they have a lot of subtleties to get them to feel right, so the solutions to them both drastically changed the way the game had to be designed. So let's start with finding the falling direction. One might imagine that the game could simply look around and have Mario fall towards the nearest planet. And if this game only had spherical planets, that might just work. Looking at more galaxies though, and the answer can get quite a bit more complicated. For instance, the Beach Bowl galaxy has what appears to be a spherical planet on its bottom half. So if the game just had Mario fall towards the nearest planet, you might think Mario would be able to jump off and run around it. If you try though, Mario will fall right off the side and die pretty much immediately. So the game clearly doesn't attract to every planet. And so you might make a second guess. Maybe the game uses the direction Mario is jumping to determine how he'll fall. But in the Flip Switch galaxy, we can try this same trick of jumping right off the edge, only to be wrapped around and attracted to the other side of the level. And the more we look at this in depth, the more confusing things seem to become. Jump at a wall in the Honey Hive galaxy, nothing happens. Jump at a wall in the Space Junk galaxy, and we're snapped right to it. Running around this disc-shaped planet in the Good Egg galaxy works fine, but not this similarly shaped planet right at the start of the Ghostly galaxy. And it starts to seem a little bit like an impossible paradox. Like, does Mario fall towards planets or not? What is actually going on here? To answer this, we're gonna have to dip, just briefly, into the mind of a game designer, and talk a little bit about rules and player expectations. As a game designer, it's usually in your best interest to keep things as consistent as possible. A player, either consciously or not, is always going to be thinking about making some sort of a plan for any challenge they come across, using the knowledge they've learned, things they see, and any educated guesses they can make. This might start off fairly simple, like learning that the A button makes Mario jump, and jumping into this question mark block will make a mushroom come out of the top, and touching the mushroom makes Mario bigger. After all, you've probably heard the story from Shigeru Miyamoto about how he designed the first level of Super Mario Bros. So that even if players were suspicious of a mushroom coming out of a block, the level design itself would box them in and they'd be forced to collect it. As the player learns the game's mechanics, these interactions can be layered and built on top of each other, and eventually what emerges isn't just a series of rules, but much more of a conversation between the player and the developers. Take this screen in Super Mario Bros. 3, for instance, where the player notices a question mark block boxed in, and the entrance is guarded by a chain jump. Now, if you've played a Mario game before, you don't need to be told that this box likely has something quite important in it, some sort of goodie that will help you through what's to come. After all, it only seems fair that the game would only set up such a challenge if the reward was to be worth the risk. Now, note, No part of the game has ever told you this in a text box. There was no tutorial prompt saying, item boxes might have good items, and there's no rule in the game's code demanding that a question mark block boxed in by a chain chomp needs to have something good. Instead, a lot of information was told through nothing other than some objects and an enemy. This is a fairly basic situation, but already the player can use this information to strategize, asking questions like, do I risk pulling off a tricky stunt in the hopes I'll have a power-up to help me along, or do I forgo it and hope that what's to come isn't that bad? There's actually a whole theory of game design that the core fun in playing video games comes from reading a situation, formulating a plan of attack, simulating the consequences in your head, and then executing it successfully. Or, in the case you fail, figuring out what went wrong and how to learn from it. And even situations as basic as this obstacle course can lead to quite a bit of depth. For more on this, by the way, I recommend reading this blog post by Thomas Grip, one of the designers on Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Links in the description. Oh, and for those curious, the box actually contains a leaf. The key here, though, is that what's intuitive to the player isn't always a hard and fast rule. Instead, the game's own level design and art often tell us a lot more about what's going on. So nobody is really surprised when they plummet off the edge of Beach Bowl Galaxy because, well, there's a giant waterfall there, right there on the screen, showing us exactly which way gravity falls. Despite what you might have initially believed, Mario falls towards planets was never an actual rule in the game's engine. Instead, the art and level design itself do a lot of the heavy lifting to help convey which way things will fall. To actually create gameplay that matches, the development team need a gravity system that's flexible enough to handle whatever they need to throw at it. So, the actual rules in the game's code rely on a network of secret objects known as gravity fields. The player can fall off of Beach Bowl Galaxy because around the main planet is a gravity field object telling the game that things will fall straight down. Specifically, this object is known as a parallel gravity field, which has the behavior of always pulling objects along a single direction. It's most frequently used around the bigger planets you're meant to explore, more like an older Mario game. Now, this might seem like a lot of work to go through, only to get back exactly where we started, with Mario only falling down, but by making gravity fields into objects, the designers can already do some interesting things. Super Mario Galaxy 2's Throwback Galaxy does this expertly, by guiding you through a recreation of Whomp's Fortress. Once you think you've reached the top and killed a single enemy up there, you are instead thrust through the level to its secret underside, where you fight the real boss of the level, which is a great fake-out moment. As you could expect, two separate gravity fields are used to pull this off, with one providing most of the gravity in the level, and the other being positioned extremely carefully at the right spot to not allow players to skip right to it. And this sort of level design technique can be seen all over both Galaxy games. As another example, check out the Freeze Flame Galaxy, where you have to constantly flip between an intricate maze of parallel gravity fields to navigate the molten core of a planet that's been split in two. Designs like this aren't uncommon in the game's files, with the developers often having to mix together multiple different gravity fields to get some fun gameplay out of it. So the first planet you ever see in the Good Egg Galaxy starts the player off on a flat grassy plain, with a few bridges gently nodding them to go to the other side. The main trick here is the use of a disk gravity field, another of the game's built-in shapes. Disk gravity fields can be thought of as two flat opposing parallel gravity fields, connected on the edge by a rounded corner that the player can run across. Making our way around to the other side of the planet, though, we have this bridge that the player has to run up. This is powered by a carefully placed parallel gravity field, and bridging the two together is this little tiny curved segment. Since the disk will be pulling gravity up, and the parallel is pointing against the wall, we need an extra gravity field here to help the transition. So another new shape, this sort of wedge thing, is used to round out the corner. And with all of them lined up correctly and set with the right priorities, the result is pretty seamless. There are a total of 8 different kinds of shapes in the game, which might not seem like a lot, but combining them together gives the developers quite a bit more freedom. In the Gusty Garden Galaxy, 3 disk gravity fields are combined together to make these little bean planets, and parallel gravity fields are peppered around to make the little pedestals on them that you can stand on. However, even with all that flexibility, you can still notice signs of the basic gravity field shapes littered throughout the rest of the galaxy. Spheres, cubes, disks, donuts, cylinders, and wires. That last one is how this question mark planet works. It tries to pull everything towards this white line you see in the middle. The final 8th shape, by the way, is the cone gravity field, which is really only ever used twice in the whole game. Once in the Sea Slide Galaxy, and once in the Toy Time Galaxy. You might be wondering why basic shapes were used instead of some other method. Well, the obvious reason is that it saves on resources. To determine which way to fall in a spherical gravity field, take your current position, draw a line towards the point in the center of the sphere, and that's it. That's the direction to fall. So even the elaborate setup at the start of Good Egg Galaxy requires just a handful of checks and some fairly basic math for 3 gravity fields, compared to the over 4,000 triangles that its collision mesh contains. But more importantly than that, the basic shapes can help craft levels that are easier for the player to understand, and easier for the designers to keep under control. If I just show you a sphere, it's pretty obvious how things will fall towards it, but the same isn't true for an intricately designed planet with houses, rocks, and craters all dotted around the landscape. Reminder, we want the gameplay to be front and center, and for the art to back that up. If each collision triangle was its own gravity field, with each triangle possibly having some influence over Mario's direction, it would be a lot of work to mark every single triangle with data about whether it should attract Mario in the first place, like tagging that these floors should, but the walls of these houses shouldn't. By splitting the collision mesh from the gravity fields, it becomes easier to reason about, and easier to fix any bugs and glitches that arise out of it. Not to mention, gravity fields are useful even outside of just planets. The Ghostly Galaxy contains a mission where you have to race this spooky boo, dressed in Speed Racer attire, by using some pole stars. If you fall, the game needs to make sure you fall all the way back down to the start so you can't cheat. And parallel gravity fields are just the perfect tool to make that happen. Dotted around every level, you'll find plenty of one-off setups and scenarios just to make sure that if things get out of hand, Mario falls exactly where he needs to be. Merging this together with planets would make it more difficult to make these kinds of small adjustments, for very little benefit. Yes, using collision meshes for gravity would make it more flexible than a small handful of shapes, but given how obvious it all now appears in Gusty Garden Galaxy, if that really was such a problem, why am I the first person to point it out? Games are often as much about getting away with clever smoke and mirrors, and gravity fields feel like a nice middle ground solution, removing some amount of flexibility, but still allowing designers to craft fun and inventive gameplay. And on that note, now that we know which way things will fall, let's take a little bit of a closer look at how things fall. Now, obviously, in the vast emptiness of space, falling is super easy. Just move Mario along the falling direction. But when there's a planet in the way, Mario needs to stop. In games like Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Sunshine, this was done through a simple process. First, draw a line downwards from Mario's center towards Mario's feet. If there's a floor there, then snap Mario to the floor, otherwise, Mario continues to fall. Sound familiar? Similarly, the game will check upwards for ceilings, and then in a small distance around Mario to look for walls. The combination of these 3 checks effectively gives Mario a cylinder for a hitbox. This is pretty standard for character collision. The 3D Zelda games all use cylinders for Link's collision, and they're also the default kind of character collision from engines like Unity and Unreal. But cylinders have a problem here. If you step on a platform into a new gravity field, the gravity will change, and that means Mario will start falling in a different direction. which means Mario's hitbox will rotate, and that can result in a lot of glitchy side effects, like clipping through the walls and getting stuck on ledges. Issues like this have actually plagued games that try to do wacky things with gravity for a long time, and Super Mario Galaxy almost certainly had this problem too during development. So Nintendo had to fix this, and they fixed it in one of the most bizarre ways I've ever seen. They swapped out the cylinder for a sphere. Now, spheres absolutely do solve this problem, because no matter how you rotate them, they're still the same shape. Gravity won't affect a sphere the same way, and any glitchiness from Mario rotating around will be completely absent. The only problem is that fitting Mario into a sphere would seem really unlikely. He's kind of a tall guy. And this is actually when I was so unsure of my own research, I asked a friend of mine to help me write some code to display Mario's hitbox in the game itself. And sure enough, Mario is actually a sphere. Though they do play some clever tricks, like detaching Mario's model from his hitbox during certain kinds of actions, like pushing up against a wall and climbing ledges. But beyond that, the team at Nintendo actually had to redesign Mario's model to fit quite a bit more snugly in a sphere. And that's something that becomes a lot more clear if we compare Mario's model from Galaxy to Mario's model in Sunshine. The Sunshine model is actually quite a bit taller and far more suited to a cylinder. In fact, in the process of checking the code for Super Mario Galaxy, I realized that there's no cylinder code left in the game at all. Almost every enemy and NPC has to have a sphere hitbox, whether they be Goombas, urchins, toads, penguins, lumas, or even some of these new enemies like the ice bubbles. Every single one has a round, plump design. Though there are some exceptions to that rule. NPCs that stay in one place, like Rosalina, can actually use multiple spheres for their hitboxes, since they never need to do any floor or wall detection. What's even more interesting, though, is that this new Mario design has stuck with future games in the series, even after the changing gravity gimmick was dropped. They had no technical reason to keep the shorter, rounder Mario, but games like Super Mario 3D World and Super Mario Odyssey use the design, and if anything, make Mario even more round. Whether the developers actually liked the smaller Mario design enough to set it as a mainstay for the series, or if they had other technical reasons to keep the sphere design, we might never know. Oh, and since you're probably wondering, Luigi has the exact same hitbox as Mario. It's pretty likely that since this was more of a bonus mode, the developers didn't want to risk redesigning everything and just stuck with Mario's hitbox dimensions, since that's what they likely tested most of the game with. Luigi's hat also pokes out of the sphere quite considerably, but low ceilings are kind of uncommon in this game to begin with, though if you do find one, it's very clear that Luigi's hat clips right into it. So the lesson here might be that animations and hitboxes can be fairly loose before anyone catches on to things being, anywhere near funky. One last thing I want to mention though, and that's shadows. Shadows are an interesting case, because they're actually an intersection where gameplay and graphics both meet. In a lot of games, shadows come from a light source like the sun, and they tilt around as long as the sun moves through the sky. You can see this approach in some Nintendo games too, like Mario Kart Wii, where you have these long, boxy shadows that clearly come from a single location. During the development of Super Mario 64, the team originally used this approach, but noticed that players were struggling quite a lot with depth perception, specifically landing accurate jumps. So they switched shadows to point always straight down. This way, the shadow would always be an accurate representation of where players would fall, allowing them to simply look at their shadow to know that they've nailed the jump right. And this is especially effective with items too. Without true 3D, it's really difficult to tell exactly where a floating red coin is in space. Add in the shadow though, and to collect it, it's as simple as lining Mario's shadow up with the one from the coin. And a lot of the time this happens, you do this without ever noticing it. Compare this to some other platformer games that either haven't noticed this trick or haven't cared, whose platforming challenges can feel particularly frustrating as a result. And you can probably already tell where I'm going with this. Since shadows in Mario games are trying to tell us where things will fall, the shadows in Super Mario Galaxy use the gravity fields as well to figure out where they should be drawn. In fact, they even have a whole special category of gravity fields that only affect shadows. It's pretty infrequently used, but that's how these coins can have shadows that stick to the walls in places like the Honey Climb Galaxy, even when Mario falls straight down. This tradition, though, of having shadows that always point where they're falling, lives on even in the new era. In certain places in Super Mario Odyssey, you can even see both kinds of shadows side by side. This pole on the left has an elongated shadow cast from the sun, while Mario is seemingly lit from straight above. If anything, Super Mario Galaxy shows us what developers can do by really committing to thinking outside the box. Spherical planets and the gravity system in general could only really work if the team could rethink everything from the collision system, to shadows, to even redesigning Mario's model itself. And this, as always, is just scratching the surface. So, the next time you play Super Mario Galaxy, take a quick look around and see if you can spot the secret influence of spherical planets all around you. Hey there, thank you so much for watching. So, a bit of a channel update. Since the first video went up, people have been asking me about how they can support me, and so just like everybody else here, I figured I'd try out having a Patreon. It is 100% optional. I don't really have any plans to make any Patreon exclusive content, but the names you see on screen here got to see this video a few days early, so that's exciting. If you would like to support me, the link is in the description. And algorithm boosts are always helpful, so please remember to like, comment, subscribe, share with friends, you get the picture. Otherwise, I know this video took quite a while to make. It's been almost 5 months since I started this project, and once Super Mario 3D All-Stars was announced, I kicked it into super high gear as well, hoping to make it in time for the release. And then I bought Among Us. So yeah, oops. As for what's next, I recently published the first half of a Q&A video that I did with fellow YouTuber Scruffy. The first part was focused on The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. The next part is actually based around Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, and I want to have that edited down into a video in hopefully a couple of weeks, maybe? And then what's after that is a toss-up between a few different ideas I've been bouncing around in my head. If you have anything you'd like me to take a look at, the best way to reach me is either on Twitter at JasperRLZ, or you can stop by the Discord server I run. Special thanks to my feedback crew this time, who were Jewel, Jacob, Veegie, Scruffy, Muzz, SolidifiedGaming, Will, Really Tall, and Argle Bargle. And extra special thanks to riidefi, who helped me build the hitbox visualizer for Super Mario Galaxy. If you want to play around with it yourself, I've put a link to it in the video description as well. A lot of visuals for this video were done through modifying the source code to noclip.website, which is a project I run that lets you view video game levels from Super Mario Galaxy and other games straight in your browser. And I think that's everything. Catch y'all in the next one. Take care, bye.